'cause we take this job so serious.
What in the all types of blue hell?
This is Snowman in the Morning with Cole Johnson.
And I am he. I'm the Snowman, and right now I'm going to welcome David Glenn in the house, a very dear friend of mine, onto the program. How you doing, Dave? Good to have you.
I'm doing great, Snowman. Good to be with you again.
Good to be with you. All right. Let's talk some ACC football. And the first thing I want to touch with you, they're eliminating the divisions. Why are they doing that?
Well, there's been a groundswell of support, especially in the Atlantic Division, from schools that are tired, not every year, but most of the time, tired of finishing second to the Clemson Tigers.
Right.
That, remember, won 6 straight ACC titles in football prior to last season.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of it. But as we all know, right now, the ACC is playing catch-up financially to the Big Ten and the SEC.
Right.
And one theory, and I think it's a good one, is that if you have the ability to simply match your two best teams in your conference championship game, rather than automatically one division winner versus another division winner, which in some years may not be a very compelling matchup, the ACC hopes it can avoid what happened last year, where it not only had one of the smallest TV audiences for its ACC title game between Wake Forest and Pitt. It was absolutely crushed by the SEC title game and the Big Ten title game and even others.
Yes.
So it all usually goes back to money and the ACC change of format, not this year, but soon. That reflects the money matters as well.
So with all this catch-up work they're doing to, at least try to keep up with the Big Ten and the SEC, who are making a lot of moves, how will this pan out for them? How will they actually catch up to them?
I don't think they will catch up anytime soon, but there are a handful of ways where they've taken little bites out of the apple. For example, the divisional change. Maybe that'll help ratings for the ACC football title game, which helps with sponsorships, which helps with your TV partners, etc.
Yeah.
We already know that the ACC Network, which creates a lot of revenue for the Atlantic Coast Conference, but remember, it did not exist for a long time.
Right.
The Big Ten Network is more than 10 years old. The SEC Network was created way before the ACC Network.
Yes.
So those leagues have had a much longer ramp, if you will, to build subscribers, to build advertisers, to build sponsorships. So the SEC Network and the Big Ten Network are two of the reasons that the ACC is playing catch-up. And when you and I talked maybe late last year, the ACC Network was not yet fully distributed.
Right.
And finally, they got that deal done with Comcast, which is still the biggest pay TV subscriber in the United States of America, and it had never carried the ACC Network.
Right.
The ACC getting that deal done is worth tens of millions of dollars in the coming years now that they have that final piece in place. And now they're on pretty much all the satellite options, all the cable options, and even the newer wave alternative TV options.
Right.
So almost everybody now has access to the ACC Network if they have any of these old school or new wave TV providers. So that's another step financially. And then I'm sure you've read and talked about the ACC has called Greensboro, North Carolina home for the entirety of its 69-year existence.
Yes.
It is probably moving. And in this year's North Carolina legislature budget, there are $15 million ticketed to help the ACC as long as it stays in North Carolina, as long as it keeps its headquarters, most likely Charlotte. So there's a new $15 million. Now, that's only a drop in the bucket when you're making $600 million a year, but every little bit helps.
Every little bit does help. And I hope they do stay in North Carolina. I'm just so used to having the ACC headquartered in Greensboro. I've talked about that so many times, and how that tradition should remain what it is. David Glenn joining me here on the program. And with everything that's going on and the ACC playing catch up, they're going to eliminate the divisions. There's a possibility of a move. Let's just get to football and who will do what. And I start with Wake Forest. I'm going to have Connor O'Neill on a little bit later on in the week. Does Wake Forest have a chance to repeat their performance from last year?
I would be surprised mainly because of the uncertainty surrounding their veteran quarterback, Sam Hartman. He has an undisclosed medical condition that I have been told is going to keep him out for a while.
Yeah.
Meaning the rest of August, probably all of September, maybe longer than that.
Yeah.
In an ACC where, remember, there are a whole bunch of quality returning starters at quarterback.
Right.
Virginia has Brennan Armstrong. NC State has Devin Leary. Miami has Tyler Van Dyke. Louisville has Malik Cunningham. Sam Hartman was expected to be one of those proven commodities, and now he may be unavailable for maybe the first half of the season.
Right.
So Wake does believe in their backup, a guy named Mitch Griffiths, but that's a guessing game. And in this year's Snowman, believe it or not, of the 14 ACC schools, 12 of them, all but 2, have either their own returning starter at quarterback or one of those immediately eligible transfers who was a starter somewhere else last year in major college football. So it's only Duke and Carolina breaking in a new starting quarterback, but now Wake Forest has to be added to that list, at least at the beginning of the season, with Sam Hartman sidelined.
Yeah, it's going to be something to see what Wake Forest does with their quarterback position. And the ones that you mentioned, which one of those 4 veterans that you mentioned should be or can be the biggest contributor to their team and the biggest surprise in the ACC?
You know, that's a tricky question because those might be 2 different answers. But I'll say the way you worded that question, I'll say Malik Cunningham of Louisville. I don't think Scott Satterfield, the former App State coach, is quite yet in hot seat territory the way Mike Norvell is on the hot seat at Florida State, or Jeff Collins is on the hot seat at Georgia Tech, or Dino Babers may be on the hot seat at Syracuse. But Scott Satterfield is in his 4th year there, and they want to see more of those results like they were getting, in the Bobby Petrino and other eras. And he has a 6th-year senior. Remember, eligibility is all out of whack because some guys redshirt, some guys take the free COVID year. So there's a lot of 6th-year seniors out there. Yes. And Malik Cunningham, he has been there, done that, and he's a very good starting quarterback. The Cardinals haven't always had the defense or the offensive line or the skill players surrounding him. But I think this could be a breakthrough year for Louisville. And I thought that as soon as I saw a lot of these guys, these are discretionary returns, right? Like Phil Dracovic at Boston College could have entered the NFL draft year. Last year, he decided to stay. Brennan Armstrong is a 5th-year guy at quarterback for UVA. Devin Leary, 5th-year guy for NC State. Not everybody fits this description, but when you see your guy basically at the most important position on the field staying for that 5th year or that 6th year, it's usually because they think something special has a chance to happen, either for their team or maybe they're trying to upgrade their own draft status. But I think Louisville has a lot of pieces this year on both sides of the ball. I don't think they'll beat Clemson out in the Atlantic Division, but I do think the Cardinals have a chance to be that surprise team you asked about.
Yeah, I was looking at Louisville. I was looking at Malik Cunningham because I saw flashes. Okay, didn't see the entire package, but offensively with their returners, they absolutely can compete in the Atlantic Division. How far does Pitt fall without Kenny Pickett, who's now in the NFL?
My guess is not very far. And I say guess because anytime you're losing a quarterback who was the ACC Player of the Year from an ACC championship team, you just can't be sure what's going to happen next.
Right.
But Pitt, it's much easier to do nowadays. Remember, just a couple years ago, if you signed a major college transfer, he usually had to sit out a year. Well, that stuff's out the window with immediately eligible transfers.
Right.
So rather than being in a tricky situation, Pat Narduzzi, the head coach at Pitt, who's also bringing in a new offensive coordinator, he just looked at the transfer portal. And there was a guy named Keaton Slovis, who's not only a Southern Cal player, he actually started at quarterback for 3 seasons for the Trojans.
He did.
And they weren't legendary USC teams, but if you're a 3-year starter at quarterback in the Pac-12, you're probably not a slouch.
And you got some experience at the quarterback position.
You got it. It's a plug and play. And even if it'd be unfair to ask him to be Kenny Pickett or an ACC Player of the Year candidate, but they're not panicking at quarterback. And they actually have a lot of returning talent on defense, where they're usually very good under Pat Narduzzi. They're very good on the offensive line, where I think they're going to start 5 seniors, 4th or 5th or 6th year seniors, which is never a bad sign. All returning starters.
That is very important. You and I have talked before about the importance of a good offensive line to protect their quarterback and keep him upright.
You got it. And so I think if I were kind of creating a pecking order for what we've called coastal chaos, I would still have Pitt Panthers, last year's divisional winner and ACC champion. I'd have the Pitt Panthers kind of at 1A. I do think Miami has a chance to be good in the Hurricanes' first year under Mario Cristobal. But I think the rest of that division is kind of unpredictable because Carolina doesn't have Sam Howell.
Right.
UVA has a new head coach. Virginia has a new head coach. And Duke and Georgia Tech are not expected to be great this year. So it really starts with Pitt and Miami. And then your guess is as good as mine after that.
Exactly. Focus on Georgia Tech and how far they have fallen. You know, I saw one game a couple of years ago where they scored the first 7 points of the game, and then Trevor Lawrence and Clemson said, enough of this, and they hung 51 on them in the first half. That, for me, kind of encapsulates how far Georgia Tech has fallen. And now entering this year, the noises are, you and I both have heard it, that, you know, Georgia Tech's not expected to do anything. What has gone on with Georgia Tech and they have fallen so fast?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to making the wrong calls at head coach, right? Jeff Collins has been a very good defensive coordinator in his career, but he did not have a long distinguished track record as a head coach prior to being hired at Georgia Tech. He has 9 wins after 3 seasons with the Yellow Jackets. So you can't average 3 wins a year for very long and keep your job. I think his neighborhood matters, right? I mean, you got the Georgia Bulldogs on your schedule every year, and you're going to lose that a large majority of the time. You don't have to play Clemson every year, but they're also one of your sort of neighborly rivals. You're right there in Atlanta, which is very much SEC country culturally. So you're kind of this high academic institution surrounded by Florida schools to your south, the mighty Clemson Tigers to your north, Georgia and Athens, Alabama to your west. All of those schools have more flexible academic credentials in terms of what they require of their recruits. Georgia Tech's a tough place when it comes to that kind of thing.
Yes, it is.
And the Yellow Jackets just have, a smaller stadium. They have less recent success. They don't have as many bowl games lately. They don't have as many players in the NFL. So no matter who your head coach is, if getting guys through admissions is a little tricky and you don't have as much recent stuff to sell, you're not selling to 50-year-olds, right, who might remember that Georgia Tech shared a national championship in 1990 when I was a young writer. I remember that, but I'm not an 18-year-old star quarterback with eligibility remaining, right?
Exactly.
So it's a hard job, and I don't think it's coincidence that the top academic schools in football only occasionally rise to the top. Duke is bad a lot more often than Duke is good in football. Boston College has been mediocre almost every year for feels like a decade. Wake Forest peaked last year, but I think they're peaking under the best coach they've had in the history of the school in Dave Clawson. I don't know if you can just kind of crank out division titles at Wake Forest like they're cookies at Christmas.
And a Big Ten example would be Northwestern.
Right. far more down than up at Northwestern, far more down than up at Vanderbilt in football. Obviously, their tough neighborhood is the SEC, so that's the toughest of neighborhoods. It has been a theme for my 35 years of covering college athletics. Whereas in basketball, even if you're at a high academic school, you might only be signing 3 or 4 guys a year.
True.
And your admissions department may say, hey, as long as they're above NCAA minimums, sign 3 guys that are at or above the minimums and then 1 guy who looks more like our university. In football, you might be signing 25 guys a year.
True.
And at the better academic institutions, they might say 12 or 13 of those guys need to look a little bit more like our student body. And at those high academic universities, those student bodies have pretty high SAT scores and high school GPAs. And it's hard to find superstar football players with those kind of numbers.
I found that out when I applied and got into Northwestern and realized how hard their standards are as compared to, say, University of Illinois. I got accepted by both of those schools. I wound up going to Northeast Missouri State in 1990. And you mentioned 1990 with Georgia Tech. The game they beat Virginia in Scottsdale, in Scott Stadium. Scott Stadium in Charlottesville. Thank you. I can't remember being glued to the television for a game, and that was televised by CBS, folks. Remember, ACC had a contract with CBS for the longest time. And Georgia Tech rallied and won that game as the clock went dead and as the sun went down. That's like one of their crowning moments. I don't think we'll ever see that again unless some big-time recruiting happens and they have something, as you said, Dave, to sell to future recruits, to future students, and more importantly, to future fans. When was the last time Bobby Dodd Stadium was completely sold out for a game, an ACC game at that?
It has happened at Georgia Tech. The old timers will tell you about the Bobby Ross year's success.
Yes.
You and I are old enough to remember the George O'Leary peak, and that shared national title and some high-level ACC success.
Yes.
For a while, remember, it was George O'Leary as the head coach running the defense, and he was a great defensive mind.
That he was.
And it was Ralph Friedgen, who later became the head coach at Maryland, running the Georgia Tech offense. That's a heck of a brain trust right there.
Yeah.
And obviously you need great players to go with those great coaches. But yeah, it has happened. But I think at those better academic schools, it tends to be cyclical.
Yes.
And you might be waiting, 20 years between peaks sometimes.
Yeah.
Dave Clawson took Wake to the ACC title game last year. But it was 15, 16, 17 years ago that Jim Grobe took the Deacs to the ACC title in 2005.
2005.
So it happens.
That was a single-digit scoring game, if I remember correctly, played in Charlotte.
It happens. But it's hard to win consistently at the very high level at an academic university in football.
Yeah, it is. It is. Like I said, look at Northwestern and Pat Fitzgerald. One of the most celebrated Wildcats ever. And he has trouble recruiting. He'll tell you that up front. And I hope to have Pat Fitzgerald as a guest one day on the show. But this is David Glenn, a very, very dear friend of mine, talking ACC. Hope to have you throughout the season, man, to break some stuff down. And as the late great Keith Jackson said, we're gonna play football. Yippee! Let's watch some ACC football, and we'll break it down throughout the season. Thank you, David.
Always good to be with you, Snowman. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. David Glenn joining us here on the program. Don't forget, you can support the show via Patreon. Go to patreon.com/SIT Morning, where you get some behind-the-scenes footage of what is going on with the show and with the brand new STM Sports Radio Network. Snowman in the Morning continues in a flash.
'Cause we take this job so serious.
What in the all types of blue hell?
This is Snowman in the Morning with Cole Johnson.